I think what we're seeing at this conference and the events going on in industry in general is that it's a very dynamic time right now in spaceflight, perhaps the most dynamic since the space age began 50 years ago. That initial paradigm from the beginning of the space age of really a government-directed human spaceflight program that gave us a lot of tremendous successes in the first decade or so, that got us to the moon by 1969. That momentum has really sort of petered out at this point. Once Apollo was done, we had the shuttle. Now the shuttle is ending. We're left with the space station, but that momentum that we built up then has gone away, and we really need to think long and hard about what's the best way to do human spaceflight, which also means thinking about why you want to do human spaceflight. And there are a lot of good long-term reasons, like survival of the species, that you want to do that. It's tough to sell a program like that on survival of the species. You need sort of that short-term motivation. I think a lot of that's going to come from the commercial sector. Making money is a tremendous motivating factor, and if there's a way to make money by sending people into space suborbitally and orbitally, whether it's for tourism, for research, for other work, that's going to build up a new industrial base, maybe even a new space age, that's going to benefit both the public and private sectors. It's going to make access to space a lot more routine, a lot less expensive, a lot safer, and that's really going to potentially enable a new era of exploration and utilization of space. And I think it's a lot of chaos right now, and a lot of people are worried about losing jobs and losing leadership. But I think there's a very strong chance that in the long run, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we're going to see much more robust space industry that's providing a lot of benefits for society here on Earth, and it's really going to the next major step for us reaching to the stars. Whenever there's change, whenever there's major change, there's going to be resistance to it from people who did well under the old system, and understandably so. And that's true in space or any place else. And there's understandable concern about the loss of national leadership, national prestige, when we're not able to launch astronauts into space. We've gone through that period once before after Apollo. There was a 6-year period between Apollo Soyuz and the first shuttle mission where we weren't able to launch people into space. We survived that then. The circumstances are a little different now. We've got a space station to support, so we need to keep sending people up. So we have to go through the Russians, which makes supporting commercial crew initiatives, I think, important to see if they really can help fill that gap much more quickly than a government program. It's understandable that there's a lot of concern about that, but I think the short-term chaos that we're experiencing right now is going to be more than made up by the long-term benefits that we're going to get from a much more robust public and private sector space program.
Do you have any thoughts on the perceived Chinese threat?
Well, a lot of people wonder, try to make out the Chinese as the next Soviet Union that's going to race us, back to the moon in their case, since they haven't been there yet, or something like that. If the Chinese are racing, they're doing a really bad job at it because they're not launching very often. Their last human spaceflight was in 2008, and it looks like the next one won't be until maybe even next year. And they're talking about gradually building up a space station, a relatively modest space station, much smaller than the International Space Station, but something that would be an all-Chinese station by the end of the decade. And it's not a priority in the same sense space was a priority to us and to the Soviet Union in the 1960s, when we poured a tremendous amount of our national capabilities into those programs. It's something that's clearly that they want to pursue. And I don't have any doubt that someday Chinese missions will go to the moon. Chinese astronauts will walk on the moon. They just don't seem to be in a tremendous hurry. And I think some of the impact of having a Chinese manned lunar mission will be lost if we're routinely sending people into space and doing new and creative things in space rather than trying to redo what we did 50 years ago.
Any thoughts on Mars out there?
I think Mars is an ultimate destination for human space exploration. It's probably the most likely place in the solar system beyond Earth where people can live for an extended period of time. you've got just enough gravity, you've got a little bit of an atmosphere, you can dig into the soil, get your radiation protection. It's going to be a long time, I think, before we get there, at least in a sustainable way. I don't doubt that if we decide, like Apollo in the 1960s, to make it a national priority, we could probably sprint there relatively quickly, on the order of 10 to 15 years if we poured the same resources into the space program now as we did then. But we wouldn't be able to go back for many decades afterwards, as is the case in the moon. So I think Mars is an important goal, but it's an important long-term goal. And I think we need to build up our capabilities so that when we're ready to go to Mars, we can do it in an affordable and sustainable way, and that we can go to Mars and go there to stay. And so I think that's more important than trying to set an arbitrary deadline and either trying to race to meet it or keep shifting that deadline back when it's clear that we're not going to make it.